Well, hey folks, it's your old pal King Waspinator. Welcome back to Total Party Skills. Hit like and subscribe. Since people inquire about it on and off, and it seems to in some ways be a sticking point with some people before they're willing to check out a game, I figured I'd talk a little bit more about my rule system for both those who are unfamiliar with it and maybe perhaps for those who have read some of the books and it might help clarify a few things. Not that I've really heard too much people come back at me with too much confusion over it. Its primary inspirations are the D20 OSR and the old original 90s White Wolf rules. No specific edition of either. Just kind of like the rules systems in general. The overall kind of structure of the total party system is basically more like my idea of a boiled down White Wolf system, but part of that boiling down process is trying to make it replicate the OSR's kind of more basic modular formatting compared to like modern day, D&D or even as complicated as the original World of Darkness was. For one thing, I use the mind, body, spirit thing. I know like a few other games have used that. I'm not terribly familiar with them, although from what I gather, I'm using them a bit differently, thankfully, so it makes it a bit distinguishable. But, they're fairly generic terms. But, when you're looking at what White Wolf does with its attribute categories of, body, physical, social, mental, and whatever the hell they label them, and then they got the three attributes for each one. Well, instead, I just collapse it down to just the three core categories and treat that as the character's raw potential for the various kinds of skills and actions that the characters can make in the course of their game. That would be based upon one of those three overall kind of categories of, potential. So obviously body will be, doing all your various physical actions, mind for all your mental, stuff, and spirit more for your kind of empathic, charismatic, intuitive kind of abilities. Now, what I do is that each character will start off with 1 point in each of those, and that generally at character creation they get a total of 3 points they can add as they wish to these attributes, with the limitation that generally they're not going to be allowed to put more than 3 points in anything in total, including the one that already comes with it. This kind of gives you kind of a devil's choice where either you can just flatline everything and just have 2 points in each skill, or I mean each attribute, or you can have one attribute as high as 3, but that means that you're going to have to make one of the other attributes a 1. Now, the number that you have, 1, 2, or 3, is the amount of dice that you get to roll when you perform an action that relies upon, the attribute in question. Actions range in difficulty from 3 for very easy tasks, 6 for your average things, 10 for hard, 14 for very hard, and 18 for an impossible. Evening everything out for 2s, seems like that might be the wisest thing to go, way to go. However, your character will be limited, to only being able to accomplish hard tasks, but getting up to the very hard is going to be monumentally difficult without a lot of points put into a dedicated skill that's relevant to the role in question, and the impossible will be forever out of their reach, whereas if you go ahead and have something with a 3-point dice pool, you'll be able to pull off the impossible every once in a while, as long as you have some amount of skill that's relevant to it. Otherwise, if you were just to do a raw roll without a skill, the impossible is still not technically achievable. But that's where skill comes in. Now, skill categories are a bit more chopped up. There's several categories. Some games I refer to them as schools. Each one has 3 skills in it. There's 3 categories that they each tie off of the attributes. So there's a body school, there's a mind school, there's a spirit school. Body gives you, your agility, your beauty, and your strength as skills. Mind gives you perception, knowledge, and technology. And spirit is charisma, empathy, and focus. There's also a school for combat skills, boxing, melee, and ranged. And strange skills, which are, not out of the realms for regular people to learn, but not common knowledge kinds of abilities. So it tends to reflect that the characters had some sort of unique background training or schooling. And these would be stuff like skill in art, skill in foreign languages, and skill in science, which does intentionally have some overlap with stuff like knowledge and technology. a lot of these things are supposed to intentionally be there so that they're somewhat subject to interpretation in the moment, and so that characters or the players can make the argument on behalf of their character being allowed to use certain skills in certain situations if they feel that they can justify it somehow when to make their role better. Also, tying off of attributes, you have your character's status levels. That's their health, their sanity, and their morale. These are basically their hit points, except they have hit points not only for their character's physical health, but also to keep track of their self-confidence and their self-control. Now, these are limited. The number of levels that the character has in an individual status is equal to the associated attribute plus 2. This is one of those things that, in terms of the modularity of the game, if you find that your player characters are getting themselves killed off too easily, you can dial up the amount of health levels that everyone gets. So if you don't want to do just attribute plus 2, you can do attribute plus 4 or whatever. However, you should remember to counter adjust everything else in terms of NPC stats and all that other kind of stuff to balance things out as you so desire. But by use of tracking the sanity and morale, characters are not as likely to be attacked in such a ways. The ability to successfully attack someone's sanity or morale is at the very bare minimum a hard task and requires skill and stuff that a lot of player characters might not necessarily think right off the bat would be important for combat, like empathy. Your ability to read somebody and figure out what will sting the hardest on them that you can use to then undermine their self-confidence. Hopefully, though, as long as it's not overused, it should at least create some sort of level of uncertainty when characters are in dialogue scenes that might actually cause players just to be a little bit more circumspect. Part of the lethality of the system is it's kind of intended to kind of low-key actually encourage combat and danger avoidance. You want your characters to survive and level up and accomplish their goals, where they're going to have to try to avoid fights, and they're going to have to try to avoid getting into stupid arguments, with people who might be able to sting them to the quick. Obviously you lose. The way characters, can be lost is that it's not just reaching 0 levels and whatever the status is. That just means that they're incapacitated for a period of time. If they take any more damage of any kind to that status after it's reached 0, that status is effectively considered destroyed and the character is lost. If that happens to health, then that obviously equates to character death. If that happens to their sanity or morale, that is more just that their self-confidence or their self-assuredness is so broken that it's going to take years upon years of deep therapy to ever get them to a point where they'd be playable again, which basically makes them effectively removed from the game, unless all the other people playing are totally fine with skipping ahead multiple years just so you can keep playing your same character, which, and the healing rates in the game are pretty slow. However, because these are role-playing games, the sci-fi and fantasy elements do mean that there are magic spells or items or technological devices that can allow characters to heal and recover faster than just what, natural time would allow when on their own. Also, there's rules for receiving, continuous care from a therapist or a medical doctor and all that other kind of stuff, and how that might affect a character's recovery rates. Characters can generally place points into all the various standard skills of, mind, body, spirit, combat, and strange as they wish whenever they gain skill points as they level up. However, characters will have stuff that are kind of based on defining their character's concept, stand in for things that you find in a lot of games, the character's species, if applicable to the setting, or, whatever their class, job, occupation, you might call it. They're designed in such a way that most of them, they don't come with a ton of description. You should, kind of have an idea what, a warrior kind of is, that you haven't have that spelled out to you. The various kind of jobs and classes will list a skill category or school that is best associated with that particular occupation or job, or reflects the kind of training they have. That character will have a certain amount of points automatically devoted to that, and then the remainder of their points they can kind of just place at will. Some of those occupation, jobs, classes, whatever, will allow players to have access to various special skills and/or magic skills, depending on how the setting frames things. These are your skills of divine, infernal, and psionic magic, as well as martial arts. It takes different things to be able to have access to these skills, and as a character levels up, if they go through the proper requirements, they can put points in those skills, even if they don't necessarily start off as a class that would give them access to those right off the bat. But, you know, depending on what it is, like, in order to be able to get and gain access to divine skills, the character is going to have to go through some sort of religious indoctrination. Infernal skills generally, you know, require access to materials or tutorship and years of study or some amount of study. Magic itself is, like, potentially very powerful in terms of the effects that players can create as spells. However, it's a major time sink to be able to create a spell that's actually castable. If you try to, you know, whip together a spell in a very short amount of time, it's going to be very hard or impossible to cast. Whereas if you take, several months to a year, you can have a spell that you can just bang off at an average level of difficulty without barely having to think about it. It's kind of almost a Doctor Strange type of magic in that way, where, you know, you have a long training montage that your character has to go through, where they spend at least a good portion of their game day working on studying how to craft the spell in question. Spells that already have instructions that are coming from tutors obviously can decrease the amount of time it takes to learn these things, but on their own, the access to the higher powers, at least through infernal magic, is quite a time sink. Whereas with divine, it's in most cases just a matter of simple prayer, with the exception of exorcism, which takes a little bit of time to exercise a proper demon out of someone. Then there's also psionics, which are also more intuitive. That's your stuff like telepathy, psychokinesis, clairvoyance. And martial arts are the most unique of all the skills. They give you a passive bonus that's kind of always in effect. They are the skills of strike, parry, and dodge. These are on top of combat skills. Like reflection of, combat skills are, you can, technically like teach yourself how to box or teach yourself how to shoot a gun or teach yourself how to like wield a sword. Martial arts are supposed to imply that the character has, had a like real specific dedicated training in the arts of combat. And so what they get for that is the skills of strike, parry, and dodge. Strike means, like however many points you put into your strike skill is a bonus that's applied to any and all attacks, including attacks against someone's sanity and morale, because it's all about you've honed your senses to spot weaknesses and hit them, kind of a thing. Parry is basically a defense bonus that applies to any attacks that come at the character from close range, whether it be a melee or a boxing attack. And dodge is basically the same as the parry bonus. It's an automatic bonus to your character's defense difficulty against any attacks that are levied at it at range. Characters also have limitations. This is using various combinations of skills and attribute numbers to determine like their encumbrance value and a couple different movement values. Combat movement on a small scale is rated a bit differently than travel movement, which is like, scaled for like a whole day of walking between towns and all that kind of stuff. So they give you a bit different numbers. Those are the sorts of things that are actually the most influenced and changed by taking different species. It doesn't like give you automatic bonuses to attributes or skills, but they will warp what kind of limitations your character faces depending on what kind of creature they are, if they're not human. And I guess that's the basic gist of it. So anyway, you want to learn more, you can go to the link below in the description box and check them out on Drive-Thru RPG. And as always, stay waspinated.